This is our first event on economic inactivity. The reason we're doing it is because both Graham and myself have been speaking to senior policymakers in Belfast and in Edinburgh, and this issue came up quite strongly. And we said, look, why don't we bring together some experts and have that discussion and see what's going on, and are there some good policy solutions that would work? We don't have all the answers, but there's such expertise available on this meeting today that hopefully we can, as I say, pool thoughts on it. We have another event upcoming in a couple of weeks on economic inactivity and ill health. So if you want to register for that, KK will put the Eventbrite link in the chat as well. So this is one of several IPPO events, and we'll reflecting on what works and what doesn't work in relation to training, recruiting, and retraining older people. The event's being recorded. We'll summarize the events in a blog. I propose that I'll introduce each speaker as we go. They've been told to stick to very strict sort of timelines. We'll take an immediate question afterwards, 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll have an open discussion for about 30 minutes at the very end. So we are, I'm pretty much on time here. I think 2:05. We have a very strict agenda that KK has presented for me. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to my colleague, as I say, the head of the IPPO Scotland team, Professor Graham Roy, who's Professor of Economics at the Adam Smith Business School in Glasgow, but is currently joining us from McGill in Canada. So hopefully the line holds up. So Graham, I'll hand over to you. And again, welcome to everybody who's just joined.
Great, thank you very much, Muiris. Yes, and it's a truly international observatory today. If we have people from Adelaide and different parts of the world joining us. So so what I want to do is just to kick things off is to really just give a broad overview about what's our level of understanding about economic activity and what are the trends that we're going to discuss in more detail when we come to the policy questions in a second. So this is joint work between the IPPO and also the Economic Observatory, the sibling institute, which looks at economic questions and works closely with between the Economic Observatory and the International Public Policy Observatory. So what do we know about economic inactivity in the UK? Well, having fallen considerably for well over a decade, inactivity rose during the pandemic, and that's really important because it's offset some of the improving economic activity has offset some of the weak productivity growth we'd seen in the UK economy over a period of time. So that unwinding of that improvement in activity isn't just a challenge in its own right, but a challenge for the broader economy overall. And there's been several trends that we're seeing in that level of economic activity that we're going to unpick over these workshops over the coming months. And one thing that we do know as well is that while economic inactivity has been rising since the pandemic, it's been something which has been a much tougher nut to crack in different localities for a much longer period of time, and Glasgow and Belfast being 2 key examples of that. So what do we know about what's been happening to economic inactivity over time? Well, the first thing is that over the very long term, we've seen an increase in economic inactivity, particularly amongst men. And that's important because it's a certain type of male in the population that is moving into economic inactivity. So it's particularly people who have seen their jobs disappear over time. It's people who have got a particular challenging health background as well that we've seen have moving into inactivity. So the challenge in here isn't just about the economy, it's much more structural and social about what we need to do to improve these levels of inactivity. And you see the growth there in male inactivity over a very long period of time. But the big thing is what's been happening since the pandemic. And what we know since the pandemic is that a big driver of that increase in inactivity we've seen has come through people classifying as being long-term sick, so in ill health. So this chart here on the right-hand side essentially just compares levels of inactivity by different component since the start of the pandemic. And you see the big rise in student population who are inactive. So that's as more people became full-time students during the pandemic as part of a policy response to the pandemic. But that tailed off, as you'd expect, as people went back into the labour force. But the one to keep an eye on, the interesting one, is the yellow bars here, the growth in the long-term sick, that increased as the pandemic progressed, but has remained sticky ever since. And that's one of the big questions: is do we think that this increase in long-term sick, people who are claiming to be reporting to be economically inactive, is that way to stick around, and what are the drivers for that, and what do we do about it? But the purpose of what we'll talk about today is very much around what's been happening to, within that, is what's been happening to different age profiles. And again, we see trends emerging during the pandemic. Some of them were temporary, but some of them have been more longer term. So again, as I said, during the pandemic, as more young people moved into inactivity, you saw an increase in the number of young people 16 to 24 reporting as being economically inactive. And you see that there by the red bars, again, comparing to where they were at the start of the pandemic. But that's tailed off again as we move through the next few years. But again, the thing that's been sticky has been the increase in inactivity amongst 50 plus people in the UK. So you see that by the yellow bars there. And that matters because if you look at inactivity by different age profiles, the 50 to 64 group have the highest levels of inactivity in general beyond young people in society. So it's starting from a higher base and increasing over time. And if you link the two, one of the interesting things is about the proportion of people who are age 50 plus who are saying that the reason that they're becoming inactive is because they're sick, injured, or disabled. So this chart here just compares levels of inactivity, the reasons for inactivity for those aged 50 to 64. And you see the increased proportion of people who are saying that the reason they're inactive is because they're sick, injured, or disabled. So there's a really interesting issue going on here about age inactivity correlating with people who are inactive for ill health reasons. And that's one of the big things that we need to unpick. But of course, the rise in activity that we're seeing from across the UK over the last couple of years is particularly challenging in parts of the country where inactivity has historically been that much higher. The focus that we'll talk about later to an extent, and we're going to talk about over the next couple of workshops, particularly focus on Northern Ireland and Scotland. And you see levels of inactivity in Scotland and Northern Ireland being stubbornly higher than many other parts of the UK, and other post-industrial cities around the UK have a similar picture. So this is from the data from the census, looking at the percentage of people who are economically inactive, and you see the quite significant variation that exists across Northern Ireland. There's just one example of the variations in activities. It was very much thinking about it from a regional and, crucially, as we see in the final chart here, at a really local level. So pockets of inactivity are really concentrated at a very local spatial scale. And just looking here at Belfast, you see the significant variations that exist at a very local level in levels of inactivity between key parts of Belfast relative to the more prosperous parts. And you see at the same time, it's not just the proportion of people who are economically inactive, but it's also the proportion of people within those areas that are saying that the reason they're inactive is because they have long-term sickness or disability. And you see that there on the right-hand side. So again, real pockets of concentration. And I guess that's one of the really interesting policy questions, is not just how do we reflect on the growth in activity over the last few years, but what do we do to tackle the stubborn levels of high inactivity in key parts of our cities across the UK. So I guess what concludes, and just to try and motivate the discussion that we're going to have here in the policy reflections, is that we've seen this increase in activity across the UK, and it's been much more stubbornly sticky than some of the other trends we've seen in the labour market during the pandemic. That's largely been driven by people who are aged 50 plus, but also people citing ill health, and there's a correlation between the two there. And this really matters. It matters because it has an impact on the macroeconomy. It matters because it means an increase in the welfare bill. It matters because it's a challenge in terms of tax revenues. But we also know it's historically inactivity has been a real challenge in terms of pockets of different parts of the country, and finding out what works and tackling inactivity in these key areas is probably even more important than it has been before. So Muiris, I hope that gives a brief overview about why I guess we're here. What's the policy question we're trying to solve? And I'm really looking forward to listening to the discussion that will take place in the remainder of the session.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Graham, for that. You're bang on time, which is super, all the way from Canada. You can digest what Graham has been saying, and we can move straight away to our second speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Anne Devlin, who's a research fellow with the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin, which is very well established, very well regarded think tank. Maybe it's not undersells it a little bit, you know, but is certainly very well known in Irish government and public life. She's a labour market specialist who will talk about economic inactivity in Northern Ireland and how it compares to other UK regions and to the Republic of Ireland as well. So Anne, thank you very much for your time, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. And I think this follows on really nicely from just what Graham covered there. Yeah, so just as was said there, I'm just going to talk a bit today about economic inactivity in Northern Ireland. So I'm actually working on a couple of projects on inactivity in Northern Ireland at the minute. Seems to be really in vogue again. So just as Graham said there, just by way of context, I'm sure some people know, but economic inactivity has been persistently high in Northern Ireland when compared to other UK countries for 30 years. And we've seen a bit of convergence over time, but really not much, and not to the extent that we'd like to see. I think it's important to note this isn't something new. This has been included within the programme for government here for some time, at least when we have a functioning government anyway, as an area that needs tackled. And Graham mentioned, you know, what the inactivity feeds into. There's the personal ramifications and then the more macro ramifications. There's a lot of talk recently about the productivity problem in the UK, and the productivity and the problem in Northern Ireland is even greater than that. Higher reliance on social security and all the other issues. And then just Graham mentioned there about the high levels of sickness, disability, and we have particularly high levels of disability in Northern Ireland, regardless of how you're measuring that. It's been the case for some time. I've done some research on that myself, and we're still not entirely sure why that might be the case. And given the correlation between age and disability, it's particularly the case amongst that over 50 population that we're talking about today. So just if we start looking at inactivity over time across the UK regions, I somehow managed to lose Wales in my legend, but it's the light blue line there. But Northern Ireland is the red line there, just trending steadily and stubbornly, as Graham put it, that's a good way of putting it, ahead of the other UK constituent countries. Interestingly, we sort of see a bit of divergence post-COVID. And what we seem to be seeing here is that them higher levels of inactivity, there's been steady increases over the pandemic period in England, Scotland and Wales, whereas in Northern Ireland it seems to have played out a bit differently. We had a sort of sharp, short increase at the beginning and then have returned down to sort of in and around pandemic levels, which is interesting. It's hard to know whether that's because of a high baseline or what actually might be going on behind that. So just to look at the makeup then of the inactivity, which Graham alluded to as well. In Northern Ireland, 36%, so across the whole working age bracket, 36% of the inactive are because of sickness, disability. Not much higher than Scotland and Wales, but when we look to England, it's considerably higher, where it's 27%. Other things to note here, we have a higher number of students in Northern Ireland. I think that's interesting. We hear a lot about the brain drain from Northern Ireland to the England in particular. And also we have a smaller proportion here who are inactive due to looking after the home or family, which I thought was quite interesting. When I went then to look, we have quite good female labour force participation in Northern Ireland, but when you look within that then, it's not sort of maybe the good news story it appears. We have a lot of women in lower paid, lower income jobs, maybe taking the more flexible work where it's available. And then we have a lot more people working part-time here. So that's for the whole age bracket. When we look then at the 50 to 64-year-olds, so that top end that we're interested in, again, we see this convergence over time to some extent. What I find worth noting is we really see convergence over the recessionary period. So the sort of difference peaked and inactivity peaked amongst this age group, 2008, 2009. Now, that's maybe counterintuitive to a recessionary period, but that sort of period, we also see shifts in women's labour force participation maybe coming up to this, changes in the retirement age, and also changes in the social security system. So all maybe having an impact there and seeing that convergence for them older people in the economic inactivity rates. And again, the COVID sort of blip is really evident there in Northern Ireland for that 50 to 64-year-old group. And this isn't the totally latest data, but up to March 23, it actually was down to lower than the pre-pandemic level. So I think it's interesting to see that Northern Ireland seems to be reacting differently to the pandemic than England and Scotland and Wales have for that cohort, where they've seen sort of steady increases. And I think it'll be interesting to see what way that continues to play out. So always, you know, we tend to look to the UK whenever we're looking at sort of any economic outcomes in Northern Ireland. But we've also, since the Brexit referendum, there's been a lot more all-island research, so comparing Northern Ireland to Ireland, and I've been involved in quite a bit of that within the ESRI. So when I first looked at inactivity, I couldn't believe it when I found they were nearly exactly the same. I actually went back a couple of times to check I hadn't done something wrong. So given just how different the two economies are, you know, we hear all the time about the growth in Ireland and the jobs and the high incomes, different things like that. I was really surprised to see this. You know, there's only a couple of percentage points in difference for some time. But again, when we look within that makeup, we really see huge differences here. Again, the long-term sick or disabled is that red block, considerably higher in Northern Ireland than it is in Ireland. A lot more students in Ireland than there is in Northern Ireland. Again, not surprising. I had done some work on north-south education systems, and there's been a lot of work in Ireland over the last 10, 20 years in sort of social mobility and keeping people on in education. And they're really starting to see the benefits of that, that just hasn't been seen to the same extent in Northern Ireland. And again, the looking after home or family is much higher in Ireland than it is in Northern Ireland, which I thought was interesting. And I suppose there's a lot to look at there. Is it the elder care or is it the child care? And what exactly is causing these differences? But definitely wasn't what I anticipated to see the headline rates just so close in these two places. So just briefly, I'm not going to get into these. I'm going to maybe raise more questions than I started with and leave it for everybody else to talk about when we come to talking about policy interventions. There's a whole range of barriers for people accessing the labour market. Disability and health is obviously a big one, particularly in Northern Ireland. Much higher mental ill health here. Care and responsibilities with this over 50 group, you know, we need to think about the sandwich generation. Are they maybe caring for two groups? Are they looking after grandchildren and elder care? Employment opportunities, I think that's important in Northern Ireland. Is the labour market attractive? And the changing world of work. I think if you're out of work for a while, all this hybrid and Zoom meetings has probably got a lot scarier. And then confidence and social security system have come up for years about being barriers to the labour market. So just some further considerations that I think are important. I know I can see I'm under time pressure. I think we talk about the inactive population, but there's a huge amount of difference within that in terms of the groups, and even within those groups, there's a lot of difference. So I think it makes policy very complicated. And then I think making policy in Northern Ireland is always difficult. And in terms of this sort of inactivity for older people or those aged 50 to 64, I maybe shouldn't say older people, we have those higher rates of disability. They're long-standing and they're quite complicated. We have lower educational attainment across the board in Northern Ireland, but particularly at older ages. The jobs available, there's a big push post-Good Friday Agreement to get numbers of jobs into Northern Ireland, but have they been good jobs or worthwhile jobs that people are encouraged to go into the labour force? And then finally, I mentioned disability and mental health. And this all sort of links back to the Troubles legacy. I think we're starting to see a lot more research on that now about the intergenerational transmission of trauma and how that might be impacting the economy. So that was a whistle-stop tour, so I can stop there.
Excellent, Anne. Thank you so much for covering so much ground so swiftly. And if there was anything, Anne, I maybe should have said to you before, and if you'd any ESRI or other reports you wanted to pop in the chat for participants who might that speaks to what you've addressed. Absolutely. There, please do. We move on directly to Natalie. So Natalie, hi. Didn't get to meet beforehand, but thank you so much for joining us. I'm very pleased to introduce somebody again keeping it quite local to the Northern Ireland situation. But I mean, this sort of granular level of detail is really important for good policy, I think. So Natalie works with a project business in the community, Northern Ireland's / Age at Work, and she's going to speak about the Still Ready for Work programme, which is an employment support program for over 50s, and to talk about her experiences there and some of the challenges arising. So hopefully it'll resonate or provide food for thought for people on the line. So Natalie, your time starts now, as we say.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And please forgive my background at the moment. So yes, my name's Natalie. I'm the Age at Work Programme Manager with Business in the Community. Our project is in a partnership with Age NI. So today I'll be speaking to you about the employability project within our programme to support people over the age of 50 to move back into employment. It's perhaps been discussed already, but there has been post-COVID, there has been a rise in the number of older people hoping to move back into work simply because of the cost of living crisis at present. It's kind of forcing people to come back out of retirement. There's been various different reasons. So the Still Ready for Work programme, the part of it is to raise awareness of our ageing workforce. So that is as much on the importance of raising that awareness to businesses to make them more receptive and prepared for the broader diversity of people that may be applying for jobs. And that can be, there is sort of an unconscious bias still within business in their recruitment strategies. So it's raising awareness on how businesses can recruit, retain, and retrain older workers and new staff that will be over the age of 50. So we're trying to support businesses to be more age inclusive within that. We offer within our program, we have the age inclusive toolkits, which are for the businesses, resources that we can provide for them to perhaps have an impact on their internal HR and ED&I individuals to perhaps look at their policies and procedures, look at their training processes and the opportunities for reverse mentorship. Lots of case studies that we can make available for businesses to gain access to. The Age Inclusive Business Review there is an online platform that businesses can do a bit of an introspective look on how diverse their workforce is. It's a survey that helps them to see how age friendly they are, and it produces a bespoke report that they can access that helps them to then inform how they go forward with policies, whether it be support around the menopause. We would be able to help them improve their policies around menopause support for women over the age of 50, or indeed younger women as well. The learning networks, again, are for more the business side. Then we have the Still Ready for Work and also the mid-career reviews. The mid-career reviews are carried out by our partner, Age NI, and they are very much geared towards people that are over 50 who have maybe worked in a particular environment for 30 plus years. They still want to continue to work, but we find that they just want to have a less stressful workplace. They want to have something that may be more flexible in terms of working hours. Because, you know, people over the age of 50, we're finding have competing demands for time. I'm sure it's already been discussed over this presentation, but caring responsibilities, health conditions, there's a lot more involved there that just means that older people tend to prefer a flexible working environment. So those mid-career reviews help someone to figure out what's next for me. I still want to work, and to help signpost them into potential opportunities that are more reflective of what their needs are at the stage of life that they're in. So this is the impact that we've had over in Northern Ireland. The project goes across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And this is the number. We have over 1,200 mid-career reviews that have carried out with individuals. 223 people have joined our training through the Still Ready for Work programme, which I'm going to discuss now in more detail. Over 200 businesses have carried out the reviews. And we have also, through the Still Ready for Work programme, supported 49 people into placements or sort of work placement opportunities, and 25 people have moved into employment this year following our programmes. So The Still Ready for Work programme, the only criteria for this, for people to avail of this resource, is to be over 50. They can be working, or they couldn't be working, they can be working a certain number of hours, but it's very much promoted towards people that are unemployed. It helps them to stay motivated, get a bit of confidence with a number of workshops within the programme for people that have maybe been out of work for a period of time, depending on whether they've had some form of health condition. It's helping to give them confidence to move back into the workplace. So the workshops there are 4 workshops, and people can attend one or all workshop. And because we are lottery funded, these programs are free for people to take advantage of. At the moment, they're online. If we can get enough people from within one area interested, then we will also have an in-person training session as well. So the first workshop is around creating CVs and a cover letter, and helping people to identify strengths and how they can sell themselves to for certain job applications. And secondly, we have a workshop around navigating around recruitment agencies. I know from personal experience that recruitment agencies can be quite daunting. So we help people to target recruitment agencies that are going to be specific to what their goals and interests are. And then we have a workshop on using social media to identify job opportunities. And finally, we have a workshop on how to succeed in both online and face-to-face interviews. From previous jobs I have worked on throughout the pandemic, online interviews has been a significant barrier for not only people over the age of 50, but people that are uncomfortable with technology. So we will help an individual set up their IT to promote it for any online interviews that they will have to take part in, and do like a mock run with them to build that confidence up for when they actually have to. Interviews are daunting enough without having to deal with all of the technology beforehand. So we have a workshop entirely around that. Of course, I've only been in this position for the last 6 months, but I've worked in employability projects for close to 10 years. So I think something that is of particularly challenging is trying to capture the over 50 unemployed person using the mainstream approaches that we have. I think, we go through a lot of jobs and benefits offices. A lot of our clients come through those JBOs, and to be honest, it's difficult, because I find that this age group particularly, they want to have a face-to-face in-person chat. They don't really want to have a phone call by a work coach, maybe a couple of phone calls and then refer it on. There definitely seems to be more value held by having a proper conversation with them. It might take a little bit more time, but from my experience, it has helped me working with individuals on an individual basis through the workshops, and then finding out from them at the end of that workshop, what do they want to do, and help them to perhaps arrange a work placement for them, and continually checking in. That's just with the demographic that I'm working with. They are usually through the UK Shared Prosperity funded projects or the Jobs and Benefits offices. It has been a challenge as well over the course of this project that I've been a part of it, to raise awareness to businesses and to make them more receptive and to understand the importance of being more open and better set up to attract the older worker. Gender, LGBTQI plus, all of those other diversity areas are very important, but for some reason age is not very high up on the agenda within the business community. So I think that is in part playing into why it's harder at times to support older workers over the age of 50 back into work again. I think a lot of it comes down to understanding more about what they need, what they want out of a workplace, and what their goals are, because there's still there's still 20+ years of work within an individual. And so I think part of my job is to make businesses more aware of this and to create those environments for people. And that's really that's really all I had to talk to you about today.
It's excellent. Great.
Happy to have any questions if anyone has any.
You're very kind. Thank you, Natalie. As I said at the start, I mean, you can't beat that first-hand experience, which you clearly have in spades of working and dealing with these practical issues. So thank you very much for speaking. So we'll move from the local now to very much the international, and I'm extremely grateful for Massimiliano Mascarini. I hope I got that name right. From Eurofound for joining us. So this is one of the European agencies based. I think it's the only EU agency actually based in the Republic of Ireland, just outside Dublin. It's the European Foundation for Living and Working Conditions, and very pleased that he and the next speaker are going to provide us with some kind of international perspectives. So Masi, as I gather you go by from KK, please, the floor is yours, and thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot. And yes, my Masi is the workable version of my name. That Massimiliano is very, very long. And so thanks a lot for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm happy to provide a short overview of what happened during COVID, actually, in order to address the economic inactivity of the over 50s, especially in the field of employment and the related policy measures implemented in the European Union. I hope you can see my slides, actually. I
was about to say yes. The slides are perfect, so please go ahead. Yeah, perfect.
So basically, what I'm presenting is the results of work that we did on the impact of COVID-19 on older people and the impact in lives, support, and care. But given the topic of the event today, I will focus on work, on paid and unpaid work and finances, and how member states implemented measures in order to integrate or measures focus on older people. Now, if we see the activity rates in the European Union since 2013, actually, we see that overall they have remained constant. There has been a fluctuation in 2020 for prime age group and for young people, where the activity rate decreased. But this is not observed for the group of older people, of older 50, where actually the activity rate are more or less increased monotonically in the last 10 years. Now, of course, if we move at the member state level, there is a huge variation, actually, with countries like Sweden or Denmark that have a very high activity rate for this age group, actually, that is above 55% for the dark orange countries. While countries like Italy, Greece, Romania, and Bulgaria are those with a lower activity rate for older people. That varies from 22 to 26%. So you can see there is a lot of variation. Despite the lot of variation, the impact of COVID on work and finances of older people has been massive. Of course, we have to say that the population that has been hit the hardest in terms of economic and social implications by the COVID-19 pandemic has been young people and especially young women. But consequences has been also for older people, despite being more vulnerable to the virus. And clearly, in case of loss of jobs, the consequence for older people could be larger because it was more difficult actually to find another job. And the impact has been stronger for self-employed, actually, that so their working hours reduced. Clearly, during COVID, due to lockdown and closure of schools, actually, there has been an increase of care activities on the elderly and especially on children, on grandchild, actually, for those age 50 or above, actually. In terms of income, there has been an impact, but this has been far less than the one recorded than young people, because for this category, I mean, pensions still represent a stable income sources. But of course, during COVID, and especially now, during the cost of living crisis that we observe, there has been an expenditure increase for everyone, and especially for older people. Now, member states actually has proposed since 2020 several measures in order to foster labor market integration of older people. And these measures has been targeted to employers, to employees, or to economically inactive and unemployed people. I will provide now a short overview of this. So among policies that has been targeted employers, actually, I'd like to mention the example of Romania, actually, that introduced financial support for employers who hired people age 50 plus, who actually were dismissed during the first wave of COVID-19. And the support actually represented half of the employee salaries on the agreement that the person would have at least a 2 years contract. Regarding then, a lot of policies have been proposed regarding targeting employment and inactive people. And in this, in July 2020, actually, Austria implemented the so-called restart subsidies. So basically, there were a top-up of the salary for those employed people who took up a work of at least 20 hours per week during the following 1.5 years, actually. So this top-up actually was designed in order to bring the entire salary above the level of the unemployment benefit, because otherwise there would have been no motivation to take up this work, actually, or no financial motivation. We have to say that in July 2020, a first evaluation shown that around 3,700 were the subsidies approved, of which for 14% were for people age 50 plus, and 35 for people age 60 plus. Then a lot of things have been done for preventing unemployment. We know that the main action of the European Union was the short-time working scheme that was implemented in all the member states and actually saved a lot of jobs. It was important. There's also member states that usually do not have this type of schemes, actually implemented the schemes and received the support of the European Union. And so basically most of the schemes fall this under umbrella, and they are general schemes, do not only include specific measures of older people. But a country that proposed an additional measures for older people was Lithuania, that actually in which employers were required to pay at least the minimum wage actually to those employees on downtime during the COVID-19 pandemic. But in order to protect all the workers, actually, this subsidy was basically covered by the state, and the employers didn't have to contribute to this subsidy, actually. So this was specifically designed to save young people, to save the job of older people, and that are more likely to earn more, actually. So at some point, this subsidy was brought to 1.5 the minimum wage of the country. Then another two pillars of policies were policies aimed at guaranteeing basic living standard for employed people, and those targeting low-income workers, actually. In Italy, for example, it was issued the emergency income, actually, for a maximum of 800 euros per month for 5 months. It was launched during May 2020 for households with low-income workers and those in work poverty. Among them, actually, 28% were people age 45 plus. In Slovenia, on the other hand, they targeted more older people, actually, and especially those low-income farmers age 65 plus that didn't have a retirement allowance, that were entitled of one-off pandemic allowance of 150 euros. So this is another tool in order to support older people during the pandemic. Now, if we have to think then a major shift that happened during the pandemic, and then I'm going to conclude, is action to facilitate work after retirement. Because during the pandemic, it seems that in many countries, the pandemic has accelerated the long-term policy trend of stimulating the earning of declared income from work while receiving a pension. So basically, to encourage people still to work while receiving a pension. And these three notable examples are basically Germany, where before the pandemic, pensioners could earn up to 6,300 euros a year without being subject to pension deductions. This was raised of at least 8 times, and it was raised to 44,000 in 2020, 46,000 in 2021, in order to continue to stimulate employment, but also the re-entry work of retired people that work in essential services, like, for example, healthcare. The same happened in Greece, where pensioners who continue to work will lose now 30% instead of 60%, and a similar thing happens in Spain as well. Now, to conclude, of course, there is then I focus on work and integration to employment, and there is the need of looking beyond unemployment and income. So to devote more attention for workers who wish to work more hours, to integrate economically inactive people and those long-term unemployed people, actually. Is a thing that, of course, is important for all the age categories, but especially when people reach 50 years old. There is the need of focusing on facilitating employment among informal carers, but also to think about the working condition of people in care, and to do not repeat the 2007 mistake where people, the low-income groups were basically in some sense left behind, bringing to a big social divergence between member states, but to support these and to avoid that disparities, inequalities, and divergent trends are not ignited again in the European Union and in its member states. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Massi. It's really excellent to hear this sort of brief overview of what's going on across the European Union, and these policy prescriptions at the end are extremely interesting, I'm sure, for many people on the call here. And thank you also for sticking to time. And then finally, again, Norway, there was no data for Norway there in that chart because you're outside, but we're extremely pleased to introduce Miss Kari Osterud, who's the director of the Centre for Senior Policy in Norway, and is going to speak to us about the range of policy interventions there. So I was very interested to hear what's going in Norway. So thank you very much, Kari, and I'll tell you once you're... Oh yeah, your presentation is up. Perfect. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, you can see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak about a very important matter. My name is Kari Osterud. I'm the director of the Centre for Senior Policy in Norway. I would like to speak about the following 3 headlines. Short information about the Centre for Senior Policy, what we do in research and other activities. About older workers in Norway, status and challenges, and in the end, how to increase employment rates among older workers. There is a vast political consensus in Norway that the average retirement age needs to be increased, and that more people need to stay longer in the working life before they retire. But the big question is if we succeed. I will come back to that. Centre for Senior Policy, we are what we call a resource center dedicated to stimulation and development of policies concerning older workers in the workplace. We coordinate and contribute to consultations on senior issues with government, businesses, the social partners, and human resource organizations, where we initiate and support research within the field. We are not researchers by ourselves. We use external researchers. Activities are based on research and other relevant knowledge and experience from the field of practice. All the major parties are represented in CSP's board, and we are funded by the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. Of course, we have some mission and goals, and I will just shortly summarize this in 4 bullet points. We help and guide companies to integrate skills development, lifelong learning, and age management into their HR policy so that more workers can extend their working careers. We try to influence to an increased motivation to extend the working careers. And we try to influence to an increased political awareness in the society and among the social partners and in the workplaces and among individuals about older workers' contributions to the working life. And of course, we hope to contribute to an increased employment rate among older workers. So, so what do we do to achieve these goals? We have several activities and priorities, and I would just list up the most important things that we do. Of course, we initiate and finances research and development projects. We do industry surveys and analysis. And at our homepage, you will find some reports in English, for example, about work and pensions in the Nordics. We collaborate and do projects together with the social partners, very often a research project, but also other things like seminars and education and so on. We highlight the importance of dissemination of research, sharing knowledge with working life. Here we use seminars, webinars, newsletters, the website, social media, and other public communication. And we develop guidance for HR and management policy with an older worker perspective. So all in all, we are quite well known for our information work, knowledge and tools. And it can, as I mentioned earlier, for example, be lectures, seminars, counseling, and so on. But our most important and well-known survey is called the Norwegian Senior Policy Barometer. And we have done this survey since 2003. And this very important survey measures how perceptions and attitudes towards the senior workforce have changed over time. We do this survey among the working population, 3,000, and among the manager, 1,200, respectively every other year. And this survey is widely used by the researchers. So, about the older workers in Norway, what's the status and what's the challenges? One of the questions in the Norwegian Senior Policy Barometer is as follows. At what age would you like to retire completely from working life if you could choose completely freely? As you can see, the overall wished, the overall age that people wish to retire is around 65 years. It has decreased a little bit, but if you compare with the numbers from 2003, it has increased with almost 4 years. But if you look upon the working population over 60, they say 69.5 years. It's the age that they want to retire. But it's important to underline the responders here is they who still are in work. But it shows that a lot of seniors want to work longer. But what is the actual average retirement age? Then we can see that has been unchanged since 2014, and it had a small dip during the pandemic. But in Norway, we retire at the same age as now than we did in 2014. So I believe that many seniors retire earlier than that they really want. After all, many people say that they can imagine working until the age of close to 70 years. So I'm quite worried about these numbers. And to compare to the terms of economic inactivity, if you look up on the population of 65 years, over 60% of them are economic inactive. So why hasn't this retirement age changed, and why are still over 60% of the population at 65 years economic inactive? Our research shows that older workers faces several risks and challenges in their working life. I will just list the most important. We see that they're being excluded from job interviews or not being hired. We can see they are being excluded from participation in on-the-job training. They are being excluded from learning new technologies or working methods. They are being excluded from or not being considered for new positions. Seniors can face to be passed over for promotion, lower pay increases, and being laid off before younger colleagues if the business needs to downsize or restructure. So this is big challenges for older workers in Norway. So what can we do then to increase the employment rates among older workers? This is a short summary of all our research. And the big question is, what influence on the retirement behavior? Is the pension, is the person, or is it the job? We can divide this in three different groups of answers. The first group is what we call pension schemes or legislative changes. But it's much about pension schemes. We have what we call this pensions reform in Norway, that the rules are the longer you work, the more you get in pension, and that has influence on retirement age. The second group is what we call individual factors. A person's health situation, personal preferences, and family relationships have a great impact on when they choose to retire. Disability remains the main reason in Norway for early retirement, although the tendency is decreasing among seniors. So we can see that high-quality initiatives for reducing the number of sick leaves and improving the working environment can help to increase the retirement age. But probably the most important, but that is not given much attention, is factors in the working place. The way a person feels about their job and their place of work is probably the main decisive factor for many. It is well documented in our research that an organization's leadership and personal policy can have both a negative and a positive impact on retirement behaviors. So I'm close to the end, but I want to say something more about the factors in the working place. There are a lot of things to be done in the working place, but I will list the 7 most important things that we have found in our research. Leadership and employer policy, being valued and seen as a senior worker, that is very important. And of course, good working environment. It's important for all workers, but also, of course, for senior workers that can choose to leave the working life if the working environment is not good. And we see that seniors must have the same opportunities for competence development and lifelong learning as younger colleagues. That also stimulates to longer working career. Negative attitudes and stereotypical beliefs about older workers can contribute to prematurely excluding older workers from the working life. So it's very important that inclusion and anti-discrimination can prevent this, and that the working place take this in considering. And we also see that the balance between task and resources is important. Managing the job requires a balance between task and resources. And the seniors that report that they don't have this balance, they leave the working life earlier than others. And of course, autonomy and flexibility seems to keep seniors longer in work. And we can also see, and that's quite new research, that downsizing before retirement seems also to keep seniors longer in work. If they have balance, autonomy, and can downsize before retirement, they can stay in work for rather many years after the age of 65. So this is my presentation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Carrie. It's extremely clear and very, very interesting, and particularly those policy recommendations towards the end are absolutely fascinating. And as you were speaking, I just Googled quickly the reports in English from your centre, and I put them in the chat. So thank you for making things available in English, I would say, as well. It's hopefully a money well spent as a resource for us all. Thank you to all our speakers. I mean, we've quite a diverse range there, but covering an awful lot of ground. But it's a major pressing policy problem, and very appropriate that it would address it. So I would open we've got about just under half an hour for discussion and responses, or if people want to share experiences or let us know about work that you're doing in your organization that you feel others would be interested in, please do. But the floor is open, so I think if you could raise the virtual yellow hand, I think is the easiest way. I think on Zoom they maybe have started to number it, so I'll try and keep track. But if anyone would like to get the ball rolling, that would be very, very, or you're welcome to do so. I mean, there's no obligation, obviously, but it would be good to some conversation, or if you want to put it in the chat. Oh, Carrie, you have a question yourself? Yes.
I haven't questioned, but I forgot to say something because
oh yes,
of course we are of course not the EU member, so we are a blank country in all this statistics. But regarding the question of economic inactivity, we are something between Sweden and Denmark. We are not on the top, but we have quite a large proportion of economic activity among older workers.
Thank you for that. No, that's very helpful to know. For that. That's great, and thank you, Massey, for putting the documents there in the chat as well, and Sarah from some of our recent KK authored a blog that we put on our website recently. So folks, don't be shy. Now's your time to speak up or to ask questions or to share, as I say, knowledge or awareness of maybe other resources that you think people on the call here might be interested in knowing about.
Can I ask a question, Muiris?
Do please, KK. Yes, of course you can. You can privileged position.
Yes. Thanks everybody for speaking.
And then Susan has one.
Yeah, just wondering, just reflecting on your point, Carrie, about skills development and lifelong learning. What can we actually do to make it more inclusive for older people? Is it that they're not being offered training, because you did mention they're being excluded, or is it they don't have the correct information to make informed decisions about where to train and how?
Yeah, and just before you could think about that, Carrie, and maybe others might want to respond, but I see Susan, I'll take a question from you there as well. I saw your hand go up.
Can you see me? I'm not sure whether all the systems are working.
No, I can't.
You can hear me.
We can't see you, but can hear you perfectly. So
Okay,
please go ahead.
That's fine. I just thought I might share with you a program that's running in Northern Ireland at the moment that does help people who are, we call the people who are number of years post graduation rather than go for age. So I work for Belfast Met. And I run a program, or I deliver a program on behalf of our Department for the Economy, one of our local departments, called Assured Skills.
Yeah, and I should say, sorry, Susan, I should, Belfast Met, sorry, as everyone knows, is a higher education provider here in Belfast.
Further Education College in Belfast, the Greater Belfast area. And the program is designed primarily in the tech sector to allow people to transition from one career to another. So that's the relevance of what I'm talking about. And the premise is that companies have jobs but can't get people with the right skills. So they tend to be in the extreme technical areas. But on average, so it's, in other words, it's called a graduate retraining scheme. And you would expect that would be recent graduates. On average, most people who come on the course are between 15 and 20 years post-graduation. And it is not unusual for people who are perhaps, I will use the over 50 age group, because we've used that before, to come onto it. So it is unusual, in fact. So, I mean, how you get on it is chosen by the companies. And the companies that I've worked with, so these are companies like Microsoft and PwC and Deloitte and EY and all the big technology companies. And for example, Microsoft would say that one of the reasons they use this process is it gives them a diversity of workforce. Right. You know, the people who are potentially, have a large number of years working in the workforce can bring a huge richness to a technical area because they're solving business problems. So and I'm I'm starting 146th academy. So we've got thousands and thousands of students. Actually, we're just at our 10th anniversary, and actually just announced one today in with an investment conference in Belfast. But it is a way people who are 50 plus can go and work in artificial intelligence or cybersecurity and bring their wealth of experience into the workforce. So just a way of transitioning from one to another.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that, Susan. That's very helpful. And if you want to put anything in the chat, or indeed, before we come back to Carrie, if anybody wants to try and respond or give their view to Claire's question in the chat about where to focus, I presume, resources when we talk about our attention for upskilling and reskilling. But Carrie, did you want to come back to KK's question?
Yes, it's not one easy answer to that question, but we can see that the participation in education and courses decreases the older you get. And it's the part of the answer is that a lot of older workers don't find not relevant enough. And they also report that they don't have the time. The work doesn't make it easy to combine work and education. So they prefer to focus on the job. And it's also another thing that if we ask especially about implementing new technology or new working methods, the leaders in Norway answer that they prefer to do that with younger teams. So the older are excluded from that kind of learning. And I think that's very bad, because that's a very effective way of learning new things, just to participate in implementing new technology and new working processes. But I think it's also about negative attitudes and stereotypical beliefs about older workers. Maybe some young leaders think that they are not able to learn new things, they are not interested, but they don't have this conversation. They don't ask the question, or they don't say, I want you to participate. A lot of older workers don't get that information or that question. I think we need to also address this about negative attitudes and stereotypical thinking and beliefs.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kari. I mean, we should say when Graham and I were first discussing this, I mean, it's quite a mixed picture. I mean, there are people who are over 50 and have maybe done very successfully in their careers and made a lot of money and don't want to go back to work, of course, you know, that they're very happy to retire, have no interest in going back whatsoever. But we all know about the demographics, the change, the need for more people in the labour force and so on. So removing barriers, as you say, are as important as creating new policy initiatives. And so this is extremely interesting from the Norwegian case, but also seeing, as Marcy pointed out, the initiatives that went on across Europe during and since COVID to try and make it easier for people as well.
Just a broad comment on, I think, everything we've heard is really great to get these insights and different reflections. And one thing that jumps out, particularly from the reflections from different countries, is that there isn't an easy solution that we're missing here. This is something which many countries are dealing with, and I think the answer to the question about what should be focusing on, I think, has to be is that it cannot just be seen as an employability issue, or it cannot just be seen as a labour market issue. This has to be seen as a multi-dimensional policy response across a full suite of activities that need joined up. So we need to think about what is potentially driving people to ill health post-pandemic, and what are then the implications for our mental health support and mental well-being systems. There are people, you're right, Muiris, who are retiring early, and because that's a lifestyle choice, and they're in a fortunate position to be able to do that. But how can we make people contribute for longer if they wish to contribute for longer, and how can we provide supportive labour market environments that let you do that? I think the skills piece is really interesting because Muiris, you and I are from institutions that are set up to teach largely and train people largely in a set way, isn't it? That we have undergraduates and postgraduates, and that's the way we educate and skill our society. And we need to think about much more about how we can provide flexible learning opportunities and flexible education and upskilling throughout people's work-life journey. And if automation and AI and the changing nature of our economy means that we're going to be churning over jobs that much more frequently in the future, then this is going to be absolutely crucial, that many of us are going to have 3 or 4 or 5 radically different jobs through our careers. So we need to have that constant upskilling and training. And I don't think that our systems are set up in that way, in the same way it could be done. So I think there's a lot in there, and I think that it's interesting just to hear the different approaches that are taken in other countries as well, that actually everyone's wrestling with. And your final point, Muiris, as well, about the ageing population, particularly in Scotland and pockets of the UK where we've got that ageing population increasing much more rapidly over the next few years, how we can make sure we maximise and utilise in a supportive way the entire labour force, young and old, is going to be absolutely crucial to making sure that we can continue to have a prosperous economy and invest in the public services that we all depend upon.
Thanks very much, Graham. It's very thought-provoking, and you're absolutely right about the role of universities and all this is maybe hiding in plain sight, you know, in terms of, well, what are we doing about it? Be very interested to hear actually if anybody in the call has, you know, started to maybe change the way they train or work or offer programs, bearing in mind the changing demographic of people involved. Well, look, if there is nothing else, I mean, we don't mean to detain people unnecessarily. Hopefully everybody has found this useful and relevant, and you know, it's very nice to hear from a diverse range of speakers about this particular policy issue. Keiko, if you could put in or maybe you already have in the chat about the sort of follow-up event to this we have on economic inactivity and ill health, that our colleagues in IPPO Scotland are going to be leading on. I imagine many people on the call here would find this of interest as well. And do please keep an eye on or sign up to follow us on IPPO, Twitter, and on other social media, because we propose to do more in this area. Yeah, I think there's nothing else for me to say really, other than thank you for your time. Thanks very much for coming, and I hope you found it useful. And huge thanks to our speakers for their time. Busy people, but it's a very nice way, which we've all learned during the pandemic, to connect with a diverse audience without us all having to be physically present. So I'm giving you back 10 minutes to your day. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you again, as I say, to all our speakers, to Graham, to Carrie, to Massey, to Anne, and to Natalie. And thank you to KK and colleagues for organising.